welcome to Chilliteracy, where I am Sam and you... What? Hang on, what's the intro? Sorry, I've been completely thrown off by the just anti-mint ice cream slander in chat. It's despicable, it's upsetting. Hi, I'm Sam and you will listen to Chilliteracy. There we go, that's the intro. We got there. We got there, chat. We did it. Well done. Well done to me and me alone. How are we doing? Are we all well? Is everyone enjoying watching Dave's World Cup of Everything, where he should decide which is best? That's it. What is the best thing? I mean, I think Conan the Barbarian answered that one, but Dave's having another go. Maybe you can update it for a more contemporary audience. I don't know. That is true, Salad. That does mean there's more mint chocolate ice cream for the rest of us. So, cookie dough won against lemon. I mean, lemon. I like lemon as a flavour. I'm not sure about lemon ice cream. Sorbet just about gets a pass, but I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, cookie dough is one I struggle with anyway. Like, it's nice. I'll eat cookie dough ice cream, but there is still part of me that's... whenever I encounter it, I'm like, you've just not cooked cookies is what you've done. It doesn't feel right to call something that's not... that you've not finished cooking its own food. You can't do that. It's cheating, America, and we need to stop and talk about this. But... I should say, thank you, Speedy Wheels, for the 24 months, and thank you, Parola, for the 9 months. Both of you, much appreciated. I hope everyone is well. Now you're hungry, which is bad because you can't eat much right now due to a chest infection. That sucks. I'm really sorry to hear that. I hope that clears up for you soon. You're not standing for this cookie dough slant. It's not. Well, it's a kind of cookie embryo, right? Like, you know, is it slander? I'm just questioning. I'm just asking questions, chefs. I don't know. Yeah. You've just put it in the oven. That's all you got to do. Just put it in the oven. It's cooked. And there we go. We can all you can eat. It's cooked cookie dough. You know. I'm gonna just actually no. I was gonna say, what did you come into? But okay. Just actually no, because you'll be on the side of everyone else. You'll be against me because you eat raw pastry, Lucy. Just calling you out there, putting that out there, just a big old kick me sign on your back for people to now come and bully you. But you know, I am. You saying that probably glad none of the ones that sounded really yucky won. I'm glad that like Tiger Tail didn't make it in. Bless you, Canada, but. That is a wrong sounding ice cream. It's like licorice and orange or something, and I don't know. I guess if that's the flavour combination you're looking for, then it's well, obviously it's what you want. But no, that sounds as someone I don't like licorice, and I'm not a big fan of. I'm very very particular about which orange flavouring I like. And that, orange ice cream doesn't sound nice. Licorice ice cream, no. Put them together, you know, that equation only goes one way for me. Sorry. But I suppose before I drag chat down into like a slanging match about which ice cream flavours are best, and also alienate half of chat through to my very strong controversial opinions. I guess if you want to throw insults at each other about it, go do that in Dave's chat and let his mod clear that up, not here. That I'm giving you permission to go and just test strips off each other about ice cream preferences in Dave's chat. Go for it. I'm sorry. I hope you can all tell that I'm being silly. I hope that is obvious. Licorice dislike is something we can agree on. Down straight, Speedy. Nice one. But yeah, hello. Welcome all. As I said at the top of the stream, I am Sam and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where tonight we will have what is only part 3 of the House on the Borderland. These, like Glenn Carrig, like these are short books but they feel, I guess, fairly densely packed. I would have told you we're like 4 episodes into this one already, but no, we've only done 2. I mean, sure, I missed last week's, and so that kind of feels like I did one even though I didn't, but still, lurking and lying down. Alright, yeah, I hope that recovery goes well. Oh yeah, Andy Buns, Blue Moon ice cream. I did see on Dave's Discord someone posting pictures of Smurfs, and it does kind of look like you just whizzed up a Smurf. But, it's sure. I'd give that a try. I don't know that I'd like it, but I'd give it a try. No, not licorice. No, thank you. But yeah, we have more of the house on the Borderland, as Mario would say it, which is a sort of weird cosmic horror account of someone who lived in a house in the middle of nowhere, Ireland, and then some other people who found his diary of his account of time spent in this house, Ireland, and then seemingly passed that on to the author William Hope Hodgson to write up into this story. So really, Hodgson's done nothing, and he's just lifted someone else's diary, and this definitely isn't a work of fiction written by the author whose name is on the front of the book. And yeah, I'm trying to remember, because I've been sort of reading ahead, and I'm trying to remember whereabouts we got to last time. If anyone wants to drop a quick recap in chat while I actually remember, I need to look up the text. Oops. House on the Borderland, Gutenberg. I see you're still on ice cream. Good. Chapter 12. You just heard me trying to work out numerals, because I can't just look at one and go 12. I have to go 10, 11, 12. Good, we got there. I can spell. There. Raids was attacked by pale pig creatures. Thank you. Yes, and his sister was traumatized. Okay, that was it. Yes. The zombie pigmen crawled out of the nether. Apparently, the protagonist hit one and aggroed the lot of them, so they all just came streaming through a nether portal to attack the house. And yeah, he had to defend the house with his sister, who may or may not be able to see them. She seems oddly unaware of the pigmen, but they are seemingly very present and visible to the author, who's been shooting them and managed to curiously knock a large chunk of stone off the top of the house and squished a number. And then I think when he went out to check the next day, unless we covered that bit, there was nothing there. Also, this is just Minecraft horror. Yeah, that's... It's one of those ones that honestly I'm reading it and being like, wait, is there a bunch of modern stuff that's based on this, either intentionally or accidentally based on a story that how would you do that? I don't know, there's just bits and pieces that I'm like, hang on, this is very reminiscent of other things that I've encountered that have been written since. Raytracer, hello, welcome in. You've missed the arguments about ice cream flavour, so you come in at a good time. But yeah, the house has been under assault and shored up against pigmen attack. The protagonist, who lives in this house with his sister and his dog, who I'm trying to figure out, because I'd like to give people warning if there is going to be... I like to give people warning if there is going to be an animal that dies in the story. For instance, if it's like a dog or a cat or something. We've had some, I don't want to go into detail, but some unpleasant experiences in the past with some stories that got a little bit too heavy into the descriptions of bad things happening to animals. And the opening of this describes it as an account written by a person which has been uncovered, and it sort of seems like the intro to the story is written in retrospect. As you might say, as you might if you were kind of publishing a diary, put at the start of it, "Hi, I'm the person that wrote this, and this is my account of stuff." And in that, the person who is seemingly responsible for having written the story says that he lives in his house with his sister and his dog, Pepper. And a few unfortunate things have happened to Pepper during the course of this story, who, seems to be alive still. Well, is alive still and is doing fine with a bit of an injury. But without going to spoilers, there are some things that happen later on, which I'm not sure that we'll get to today, which sort of indicate that does the dog live or not, is what I'm not certain. It does make you do a double take every time you hear Pepper. Why? Oh, Peppa Pig. Right, yes. Yeah, exactly. Another thing. Probably based on... Yeah, is Peppa Pig just a weird retelling of this? Who knows? Who could possibly say? Ray Trace, you got to the Balatro demo final boss, but you had no chance. Yeah, I needed to take a few swings at that boss. It was rough. But yeah, so again, I don't want to spoil things, but I also want people to be advised that they're to me, without having fully yet finished reading the story myself, seems to be perhaps a little bit of ambiguity over the fate of the dog. Regards to what I have read and how it sets out at the start. This book does have an entry on does the dog die? Oh, okay. Should we all get spoiled together? Lady Mephistopheles, hello. Yes, yeah, everyone. We do now have a new emote. Chili soup, according to the. I'm gonna check on that site and see. I'm curious to see what it says. But yeah, it's a useful site. I wish to reject all of your cookies. Okay, well then, yeah, okay, yeah. If you want spoilers, there is a link there in chat. For those that wish to be spoiled, which is completely fair and genuinely said with no judgment. I completely appreciate and respect that is a thing that can upset people. It certainly does matter to a lot of people. So yeah, if you want that spoiled information, do please click and look and make your own judgments. But yes, something you want to know is coming. Yeah, I'm not sure how well I can I feel like I've made it pretty obvious what my opinion is on things, in terms of content. If I'm trying to skirt around spoilers, you've been listening to an ungodly amount of Old Gods of Asgard. That's sure that, and in the past week, and the Alan Wake streams are at least partially responsible. Yes, it's a good game with a great soundtrack. That's all I can say. But yes, I guess, yeah. So I don't know how to how best to foreshadow and forewarn things, because not least I'm not entirely sure where exactly it's going to come up. But I think we're kind of maybe okay for at least, certainly for this half. But yeah, with that kind of what feels like a slightly awkward discussion, but I think we're all okay. Do the whole dance routine now? Great. That's a good skill. You can put that on your CV. And no worries, Ray Tracer. I hope that it's a good walk. Enjoy. And yeah, we'll see you on the VOD. Hi VOD, Ray Tracer. How's it going? I hope it was a good walk. Shall we continue? Should we carry on? Should we have a story? Ooh, let's. Right. We are at, per the link at the top of chat, Chapter 12. And so if everyone is ready and comfortable and in a suitable reading position, as I'm just creaking my chair to get into, let us continue with The House on the Borderland by William Hope Hodgson. Chapter 12. The Subterranean Pit. Another week came and went, during which I spent a great deal of my time about the pit mouth. I had come to the conclusion a few days earlier that the arched hole in the angle of the great rift was the place through which the swine things had made their exit from some unholy place in the bowels of the world. How near the probable truth this went, I was to learn later. It may be easily understood that I was tremendously curious, though in a frightened way, to know to what infernal place that hole led, though so far the idea had not struck me seriously of making an investigation. I was far too much imbued with a sense of horror of these swine creatures to think of venturing willingly where there was any chance of coming into contact with them. Gradually, however, as time passed, this feeling grew insensibly less, so that when, a few days later, the thought occurred to me that it might be possible to clamber down and have a look into the hole, I was not so exceedingly averse to it as might have been imagined. Still, I do not think, even then, that I really intended to try any such foolhardy adventure. For all that I could tell, it might be certain death to enter that doleful-looking opening. And yet, such is the pertinacity of human curiosity that, at last, my chief desire was but to discover what lay beyond that gloomy entrance. Slowly, as the days slid by, my fear of the swine things became an emotion of the past, more an unpleasant, incredible memory than aught else. And thus a day came when, throwing thoughts and fancies adrift, I procured a rope from the house, and, having made it fast to a stout tree at the top of the rift, and some little distance back from the pit edge, let the other end down into the cleft until it dangled right across the mouth of the dark hole. Then, cautiously, and with many misgivings as to whether it was not a mad act that I was attempting, I climbed slowly down, using the rope as a support, until I reached the hole. Here, still holding on to the rope, I stood and peered in. All was perfectly dark, and not a sound came to me. Yet, a moment later, it seemed that I could hear something. I held my breath and listened, but all was silent as the grave, and I breathed freely once more. At the same instant I heard the sound again. It was like a noise of laboured breathing, deep and sharp-drawn. For a short second I stood, petrified, not able to move. But now the sounds had ceased again, and I could hear nothing. As I stood there, anxiously, my foot dislodged a pebble which fell inward into the dark with a hollow chink. At once the noise was taken up and repeated a score of times, each succeeding echo being fainter and seeming to travel away from me as though into remote distance. Then, as the silence fell again, I heard that stealthy breathing. For each respiration I made, I could hear an answering breath. The sounds appeared to be coming nearer, and then I heard several others, but fainter and more distant. Why I did not grip the rope and spring up out of danger, I cannot say. It was as though I had been paralyzed. I broke out into a profuse sweat and tried to moisten my lips with my tongue. My throat had gone suddenly dry, and I coughed huskily. It came back to me in a dozen horrible throaty tones, mockingly. I peered helplessly into the gloom, but still nothing showed. I had a strange, choky sensation, and again I coughed dryly. Again the echo took it up, rising and falling grotesquely and dying slowly into a muffled silence. Then, suddenly, a thought came to me, and I held my breath. The other breathing stopped. I breathed again, and once more it recommenced. But now I no longer feared. I knew that the strange sounds were not made by any lurking swine creature, but were simply the echo of my own respirations. Yet I had received such a fright that I was glad to scramble up the rift and haul up the rope. I was far too shaken and nervous to think of entering that dark hole then, and so returned to the house. I felt more myself next morning, but even then I could not summon up sufficient courage to explore the place. All this time the water in the pit had been creeping slowly up, and now stood but a little below the opening. At the rate at which it was rising, it would be level with the floor in less than another week, and I realized that, unless I carried out my investigation soon, I should probably never do so at all, as the water would rise and rise until the opening itself was submerged. It may have been this thought that stirred me to act, but, whatever it was, a couple of days later saw me standing at the top of the cleft, fully equipped for the task. This time, I was resolved to conquer my shirking and go right through with the matter. With this intention, I had brought, in addition to the rope, a bundle of candles, meaning to use them as a torch, also my double-barreled shotgun. In my belt, I had a heavy horse pistol loaded with buckshot. As before, I fastened the rope to the tree. Then, having tied my gun across my shoulders with a piece of stout cord, I lowered myself over the edge of the pit. At this movement, Pepper, who had been eyeing my actions, watchfully rose to his feet and ran to me with half a bark, half wail, it seemed to me, of warning. But I was resolved on my enterprise and bade him lie down. I would much have liked to take him with me, but this was next to impossible in the existing circumstances. As my face dropped level with the pit edge, he licked me right across the mouth, and then seizing my sleeve between his teeth began to pull back strongly. It was evident that he did not want me to go. Yet, having made up my mind, I had no intention of giving up the attempt, and with a sharp word to Pepper to release me, I continued my descent, leaving the poor old fellow at the top, barking and crying like a forsaken pup. Carefully, I lowered myself from projection to projection. I knew that a slip might mean a wetting. Reaching the entrance, I let go the rope and untied the gun from my shoulders. Then, with a last look at the sky, which I noticed was clouding over rapidly, I went forward a couple of paces so as to be shielded from the wind and lit one of the candles. Holding it above my head and grasping my gun firmly, I began to move on slowly, throwing my glances in all directions. For the first minute, I could hear the melancholy sound of Pepper's howling coming down to me. Gradually, as I penetrated further into the darkness, it grew fainter, until, in a little while, I could hear nothing. The path tended downwards somewhat, and to the left. Thence it kept on, still running to the left, until I found that it was leading me right in the direction of the house. Very cautiously, I moved onward, stopping every few steps to listen. I had gone perhaps 100 yards when, suddenly, it seemed to me that I caught a faint sound somewhere along the passage behind. With my heart thudding heavily, I listened. The noise grew plainer and appeared to be approaching rapidly. I could hear it distinctly now. It was the soft padding of running feet. In the first moments of fright, I stood irresolute, not knowing whether to go forward or backward. Then, with a sudden realization of the best thing to do, I backed up to the rocky wall on my right and, holding the candle above my head, waited, gun in hand, cursing my foolhardy curiosity for bringing me into such a strait. I had not long to wait, but a few seconds before two eyes reflected back from the gloom the rays of my candle. I raised my gun, using my right hand only, and aimed quickly. Even as I did so, something leapt out of the darkness with a blustering bark of joy that woke the echoes like thunder. It was Pepper. How he had contrived to scramble down the cleft I could not conceive. As I brushed my hand nervously over his coat, I noticed that he was dripping, and concluded that he must have tried to follow me and fallen into the water, from which he would not find it very difficult to climb. Having waited a minute or so to steady myself, I proceeded along the way, Pepper following quietly. I was curiously glad to have the old fellow with me. He was company, and somehow, with him at my heels, I was less afraid. Also, I knew how quickly his keen ears would detect the presence of any unwelcome creature, should there be such, amid the darkness that wrapped us. For some minutes we went slowly along, the path still leading straight toward the house. Soon I concluded we should be standing right beneath it, did the path but carry far enough. I led the way, cautiously, for another 50 yards or so. Then I stopped, and held the light high, and reason enough I had to be thankful that I did so, for there, not 3 paces forward, the path vanished, and in place showed a hollow blackness that sent sudden fear through me. Very cautiously I crept forward and peered down, but could see nothing. Then I crossed to the left of the passage to see whether there might be any continuation of the path. Here, right against the wall, I found that a narrow track some 3 feet wide led onward. Carefully I stepped onto it, but had not gone far before I regretted venturing thereon. For, after a few paces, the already narrow way resolved itself into a mere ledge with, on the one side, the solid, unyielding rock towering up in a great wall to the unseen roof, and, on the other, that yawning chasm. I could not help reflecting how helpless I was should I be attacked there, with no room to turn, and where even the recoil of my weapon might be sufficient to drive me headlong into the depths below. To my great relief, a little further on, the track suddenly broadened out again to its original breadth. Gradually, as I went onward, I noticed that the path trended steadily to the right, and so, after some minutes, I discovered that I was not going forward, but simply circling the huge abyss. I had, evidently, come to the end of the great passage. 5 minutes later, I stood on the spot from which I had started, having been completely round what I guessed now to be a vast pit, the mouth of which must be at least 100 yards across. For some little time I stood there, lost in perplexing thought. "What does it all mean?" was the cry that had begun to reiterate through my brain. A sudden idea struck me, and I searched round for a piece of stone. Presently I found a bit of rock, about the size of a small loaf. Sticking the candle upright in a crevice of the floor, I went back from the edge somewhat, and, taking a short run, launched the stone forward into the chasm, my idea being to throw it far enough to keep it clear of the sides. Then I stooped forward and listened. But, though I kept perfectly quiet for at least a full minute, no sound came back to me from out of the dark. I knew then that the depth of the hole must be immense, for the stone, had it struck anything, was large enough to have set the echoes of that weird place whispering for an indefinite period. Even as it was, the cavern had given back the sounds of my footfalls multitudinously. The place was awesome, and I would willingly have retraced my steps and left the mysteries of its solitudes unsolved. Only to do so meant admitting defeat. Then a thought came, to try to get a view of the abyss. It occurred to me that, if I placed my candles round the edge of the hole, I should be able to get, at least, some dim sight of the place. I found, on counting, that I had brought 15 candles in the bundle, my first intention having been, as I have already said, to make a torch of the lot. These I proceeded to place round the pit mouth, with an interval of about 20 yards between each. Having completed the circle, I stood in the passage and endeavoured to get an idea of how the place looked. But I discovered immediately that they were totally insufficient for my purpose. They did little more than make the gloom visible. One thing they did, however, and that was, they confirmed my opinion of the size of the opening, and although they showed me nothing that I wanted to see, yet the contrast they afforded to the heavy darkness pleased me curiously. It was as though 15 tiny stars shone through the subterranean night. Then, even as I stood, Pepper gave a sudden howl and was taken up by the echoes, and repeated with ghastly variations, dying away slowly. With a quick movement, I held aloft the one candle that I had kept and glanced down at the dog. At the same moment, I seemed to hear a noise, like a diabolical chuckle, rise up from the hitherto silent depths of the pit. I started. Then I recollected that it was probably the echo of Pepper's howl. Pepper had moved away from me, up the passage a few steps. He was nosing along the rocky floor, and I thought I heard him lapping. I went toward him, holding the candle low. As I moved, I heard my boots go sop, sop, and the light was reflected from something that glistened and crept past my feet swiftly toward the pit. I bent lower and looked, then gave vent to an expression of surprise. From somewhere, higher up the path, a stream of water was running quickly in the direction of the great opening and growing in its size every second. Again, Pepper gave vent to that deep-drawn howl and, running at me, seized my coat and attempted to drag me up the path toward the entrance. With a nervous gesture, I shook him off and crossed quickly over to the left-hand wall. If anything were coming, I was going to have the wall at my back. Then, as I stared anxiously up the pathway, my candle caught a gleam far up the passage. At the same moment I became conscious of a murmurous roar that grew louder and filled the whole cavern with a deafening sound. From the pit came a deep, hollow echo like the sob of a giant. Then I had sprung to one side, onto the narrow ledge that ran round the abyss, and, turning, saw a great wall of foam sweep past me and leap tumultuously into the waiting chasm. A cloud of spray burst over me, extinguishing my candle and wetting me to the skin. I still held my gun. The 3 nearest candles went out, but the further ones gave only a short flicker. After the first rush, the flow of water eased down to a steady stream, maybe a foot in depth, though I could not see this until I had procured one of the lighted candles and, with it, started to reconnoitre. Pepper had fortunately followed me as I leapt for the ledge, and now, very much subdued, kept close behind. A short examination showed me that the water reached right across the passage, and was running at a tremendous rate. Already, even as I stood there, it had deepened. I could only make a guess at what had happened. Evidently, the water in the ravine had broken into the passage by some means. If that were the case, it would go on, increasing in volume until I should find it impossible to leave the place. The thought was frightening. It was evident that I must make my exit as hurriedly as possible. Taking my gun by the stock, I sounded the water. It was a little under knee-deep. The noise it made plunging down into the pit was deafening. Then, with a call to Pepper, I stepped out into the flood, using the gun as a staff. Instantly the water boiled up over my knees and nearly to the tops of my thighs with the speed at which it was racing. For one short moment I nearly lost my footing, but the thought of what lay behind stimulated me to a fierce endeavour, and, step by step, I made headway. Of Pepper I knew nothing at first. I had all I could do to keep on my legs, and was overjoyed when he appeared beside me. He was wading manfully along. He is a big dog with longish, thin legs, and I suppose the water had less grasp on them than upon mine. Anyway, he managed a great deal better than I did, going ahead of me like a guide and wittingly or otherwise helping somewhat to break the force of the water. On we went, step by step, struggling and gasping, until somewhere about 100 yards had been safely traversed. Then, whether it was because I was taking less care, or that there was a slippery place on the rocky floor, I cannot say. But suddenly I slipped and fell on my face. Instantly the water leapt over me in a cataract, hurling me down toward that bottomless hole at a frightful speed. Frantically I struggled, but it was impossible to get a footing. I was helpless, gasping and drowning. All at once something gripped my coat and brought me to a standstill. It was Pepper. Missing me, he must have raced back through the dark turmoil to find me, and then caught and held me until I was able to get to my feet. I have a dim recollection of having seen, momentarily, the gleams of several lights, but of this I have never been quite sure. If my impressions are correct, I must have been washed down to the very brink of that awful chasm before Pepper managed to bring me to a standstill. And the lights, of course, could only have been the distant flames of the candles I had left burning. But, as I have said, I am not by any means sure. My eyes were full of water, and I had been badly shaken. And there was I, without my helpful gun, and without light, and sadly confused, with the water deepening, depending solely upon my old friend Pepper to help me out of that hellish place. I was facing the torrent. Naturally, it was the only way in which I could have sustained my position a moment, for even old Pepper could not have held me long against that terrific strain without assistance, however blind, from me. Perhaps a minute passed, during which it was touch and go with me. Then, gradually, I recommenced my tortuous way up the passage, and so began the grimmest fight with death from which ever I hope to emerge victorious. Slowly, furiously, almost hopelessly, I strove, and that faithful Pepper led me, dragged me upward and onward, until at last, ahead, I saw a gleam of blessed light. It was the entrance. Only a few yards further, and I reached the opening, with the water surging and boiling hungrily around my loins. And now I understood the cause of the catastrophe. It was raining heavily, literally in torrents. The surface of the lake was level with the bottom of the opening. Nay, more than level, it was above it. Evidently the rain had swollen the lake, and caused this premature rise, for at the rate the ravine had been filling, it would not have reached the entrance for a couple more days. Luckily, the rope by which I had descended was streaming into the opening upon the inrushing waters. Seizing the end, I knotted it securely round Pepper's body. Then, Summoning up the last remnant of my strength, I commenced to swarm up the side of the cliff. I reached the pit edge in the last stage of exhaustion, yet I had to make one more effort and haul Pepper into safety. Slowly and wearily I hauled on the rope. Once or twice it seemed that I should have to give up, for Pepper is a weighty dog and I was utterly done. Yet to let go would have meant certain death to the old fellow, and the thought spurred me to greater exertions. I have but a very hazy remembrance of the end. I recall pulling through moments that lagged strangely. I have also some recollection of seeing Pepper's muzzle appearing over the pit edge after what seemed an indefinite period of time. Then all grew suddenly dark. Chapter 13. The Trap in the Great Cellar. I suppose I must have swooned, for the next thing I remember, I opened my eyes and all was dusk. I was lying on my back with one leg doubled under the other, and Pepper was licking my ears. I felt horribly stiff, and my leg was numb from the knee downward. For a few minutes I lay thus, in a dazed condition. Then, slowly, I struggled to a sitting position and looked about me. 1 second. I return. It had stopped raining, but the trees still dripped dismally. From the pit came a continuous murmur of running water. I felt cold and shivery. My clothes were sodden, and I ached all over. Very slowly the life came back into my numbed leg, and, after a little, I essayed to stand up. This I managed at the second attempt, but I was very tottery and peculiarly weak. It seemed to me that I was going to be ill, and I made shift to stumble my way toward the house. My steps were erratic, and my head confused. At each step that I took, sharp pains shot through my limbs. I had gone, perhaps, some 30 paces, when a cry from Pepper drew my attention, and I turned stiffly toward him. The old dog was trying to follow me, but could come no further, owing to the rope with which I had hauled him up being still tied round his body, the other end not having been unfastened from the tree. For a moment I fumbled with the knots weakly, but they were wet and hard, and I could do nothing. Then I remembered my knife, and in a minute the rope was cut. How I reached the house, I scarcely know, and of the days that followed I remember still less. Of one thing I am certain, that, had it not been for my sister's untiring love and nursing, I had not been writing at this moment. When I recovered my senses, it was to find that I had been in bed for nearly 2 weeks. Yet another week passed before I was strong enough to totter out into the gardens. Even then, I was not able to walk so far as the pit. I would have liked to ask my sister how high the water had risen, but felt it was wiser not to mention the subject to her. Indeed, since then, I have made a rule never to speak to her about the strange things that happen in this great old house. It was not until a couple of days later that I managed to get across to the pit. There, I found that, in my few weeks' absence, there had been wrought a wondrous change. Instead of the 3 parts filled ravine, I looked out upon a great lake, whose placid surface reflected the light coldly. The water had risen to within 6 feet of the pit edge. Only in one part was the lake disturbed, and that was above the place where, far down under the silent waters, yawned the entrance to the vast underground pit. Here there was a continuous bubbling, and occasionally a curious sort of sobbing gurgle would find its way up from the depth. Beyond these, there was nothing to tell of the things that were hidden beneath. As I stood there, it came to me how wonderfully things had worked out. The entrance to the place whence the swine creatures had come was sealed up by a power that made me feel there was nothing more to fear from them. And yet, with the feeling, there was a sensation that now I should never learn anything further of the place from which those dreadful things had come. It was completely shut off and concealed from human curiosity forever. Strange, in the knowledge of that underground hellhole, how apposite has been the naming of the pit. One wonders how it originated and when. Naturally, one concludes that the shape and depth of the ravine would suggest the name pit. Yet, is it not possible that it has all along held a deeper significance, a hint, could one but have guessed, of the greater, more stupendous pit that lies far down in the earth, beneath this old house? Under this house. Even now the idea is strange and terrible to me, for I have proved beyond doubt that the pit yawns right below the house, which is evidently supported somewhere above the centre of it upon a tremendous arched roof of solid rock. It happened in this wise that, having occasion to go down to the cellars, the thought occurred to me to pay a visit to the great vault where the trap is situated, and see whether everything was as I had left it. Reaching the place, I walked slowly up the centre until I came to the trap. There it was, with the stones piled upon it, just as I had seen it last. I had a lantern with me, and the idea came to me that now would be a good time to investigate whatever lay under the great oak slab. Placing the lantern on the floor, I tumbled the stones off the trap and, grasping the ring, pulled the door open. As I did so, the cellar became filled with the sound of a murmurous thunder that rose from far below. At the same time, a damp wind blew up into my face, bringing with it a load of fine spray. Therewith, I dropped the trap hurriedly with a half-frightened feeling of wonder. For a moment, I stood puzzled. I was not particularly afraid. The haunting fear of the swine things had left me long ago, but I was certainly nervous and astonished. Then a sudden thought possessed me, and I raised the ponderous door with a feeling of excitement. Leaving it standing upon its end, I seized the lantern and, kneeling down, thrust it into the opening. As I did so, the moist wind and spray drove in my eyes, making me unable to see for a few moments. Even when my eyes were clear, I could distinguish nothing below me, save darkness and whirling spray. Seeing that it was useless to expect to make out anything, with the light so high, I felt in my pockets for a piece of twine with which to lower it further into the opening. Even as I fumbled, the lantern slipped from my fingers and hurtled down into the darkness. For a brief instant I watched its fall, and saw the light shine on a tumult of white foam, some 80 or 100 feet below me. Then it was gone. My sudden surmise was correct, and now I knew the cause of the wet and noise. The great cellar was connected with the pit by means of the trap which opened right above it, and the moisture was the spray rising from the water falling into the depths. In an instant I had an explanation of certain things that had hitherto puzzled me. Now I could understand why the noises on the first night of the invasion had seemed to rise directly from under my feet, and the chuckle that had sounded when first I opened the trap. Evidently some of the swine things must have been right beneath me. Another thought struck me. Were the creatures all drowned? Would they drown? I remember how unable I had been to find any traces to show that my shooting had been really fatal. Had they life as we understand life, or were they ghouls? These thoughts flashed through my brain as I stood in the dark searching my pockets for matches. I had the box in my hand now, and, striking a light, I stepped to the trap door and closed it. Then I piled the stones back upon it, after which I made my way out from the cellars. And so, I suppose, the water goes on thundering down into that bottomless hell pit. Sometimes I have an inexplicable desire to go down to the cellar, open the trap, and gaze into the impenetrable spray-damp darkness. At times the desire becomes almost overpowering in its intensity. It is not mere curiosity that prompts me, but more as though some unexplained influence were at work. Still, I never go, and intend to fight down the strange longing and crush it, even as I would the unholy thought of self-destruction. This idea of some intangible force being exerted may seem reasonless, yet my instinct warns me that it is not so. In these things, reason seems to me less to be trusted than instinct. One thought there is, in closing, that impresses itself upon me with ever-growing insistence. It is that I live in a very strange house, a very awful house, and I have begun to wonder whether I am doing wisely in staying here. Yet, if I left, where could I go and still obtain the solitude and the sense of her presence that alone make my old life bearable? Chapter 15. The Sea of Sleep. For a considerable period after the last incident, which I have narrated in my diary, I had serious thoughts of leaving this house, and might have done so, but for the great and wonderful thing of which I am about to write. How well I was advised in my heart when I stayed on here, spite of those visions and sights of unknown and unexplainable things. For, had I not stayed, then I had not seen again the face of her I loved. Yes, though few know it, none now save my sister Mary, I have loved and lost. I would write down the story of those sweet old days, but it would be like the tearing of old wounds. Yet, after that which has happened, what need have I to care? For she has come to me out of the unknown. Strangely, she warned me passionately against this house, begged me to leave it, but admitted, when I questioned her, that she could not have come to me had I been elsewhere. Yet, in spite of this, still she warned me earnestly, telling me that it was a place long ago given over to evil, and under the power of grim laws of which none here have knowledge. And I just asked her again whether she would come to me elsewhere, and she could only stand silent. It was thus that I came to the place of the Sea of Sleep, so she termed it, in her dear speech with me. I had stayed up in my study reading, and must have dozed over the book. Suddenly I awoke and sat upright with a start. For a moment I looked round with a puzzled sense of something unusual. There was a misty look about the room, giving a curious softness to each table and chair and furnishing. Gradually the mistiness increased, growing as it were out of nothing. Then, slowly, a soft white light began to glow in the room, The flames of the candles shone through it palely. I looked from side to side and found that I could still see each piece of furniture, but in a strangely unreal way, more as though the ghost of each table and chair had taken the place of the solid article. Gradually, as I looked, I saw them fade and fade, until slowly they resolved into nothingness. Now I looked again at the candles. They shone wanly, and even as I watched grew more unreal, and so vanished. The room was filled now with a soft yet luminous white twilight, like a gentle mist of light. Beyond this I could see nothing. Even the walls had vanished. Presently I became conscious that a faint, continuous sound pulsed through the silence that wrapped me. I listened intently. It grew more distinct, until it appeared to me that I harked to the breathings of some great sea. I cannot tell how long a space passed thus, but after a while it seemed that I could see through the mistiness, and slowly I became aware that I was standing upon the shore of an immense and silent sea. This shore was smooth and long, vanishing to right and left of me in extreme distances. In front swam a still immensity of sleeping ocean. At times it seemed to me that I caught a faint glimmer of light under its surface, but of this I could not be sure. Behind me rose up to an extraordinary height gaunt black cliffs. Overhead, the sky was of a uniform, cold grey colour, the whole place being lit. Excuse me, one sec. And I'm back. Where was I? There we go. Overhead, the sky was of a uniform, cold grey colour, the whole place being lit by a stupendous globe of pale fire that swam a little above the far horizon and shed a foam-like light above the quiet waters. Beyond the gentle murmur of the sea, an intense stillness prevailed. For a long while I stayed there looking out across its strangeness. Then, as I stared, it seemed that a bubble of white foam floated up out of the depths, and then, even now I know not how it was, I was looking upon, nay, looking into the face of her. Aye, into her face, into her soul. And she looked back at me with such a commingling of joy and sadness that I ran toward her blindly, crying strangely to her in a very agony of remembrance, of terror, and of a hope to come to me. Yet, spite of my crying, she stayed out there upon the sea and only shook her head sorrowfully. But in her eyes was the old earthlight of tenderness that I had come to know before all things ere we were parted. At her perverseness I grew desperate and essayed to wade out to her, yet, though I would, I could not. Some invisible barrier held me back, and I was fain to stay where I was and cry out to her in the fullness of my soul, "Oh, my darling, my darling!" but could say no more for very intensity. And at that she came over swiftly and touched me, and it was as though heaven had opened. Yet when I reached out my hands to her, she put me from her with tenderly stern hands, and I was abashed. And that brings us to the end of the chapter, and where we should take a break. Almost exactly, but, you know, if I hang around for a second, exactly on the hour. What is it? 20 seconds short of the hour. Well, there we go, that's not bad timing. Whew. Yeah. It's getting weird. Right, you know what to do. Move around, stretch, stretch the limbs that you got, cycle the fluids, or do you do what you like in a break. It's a break. I'm not your boss. I'm not here to tell you what to do or what not to do. So I'll see you back here in about 5 minutes or so, where we'll have a bit more of this. See you in a bit. welcome back. Probably, you hope you have time to make a fire before reading starts? Oh, undoubted. I mean, fire, depending on what you're trying to light the fire with and to, that stuff can go up pretty quick. So, yeah, I'm going to do the usual thing of sitting and talking for a bit anyway. But yeah, hi everybody. How are you all doing? I hope we're enjoying things so far. And trickling back in from a meaningful and fulfilling substantial break. Welcome back. Right. So, yeah. Things are continuing to ramp up in weirdness. And yeah, like for me there's sort of, as we were saying at the start, like looking at things in sort of modern day pop culture that feel, if not like directly referencing this, certainly influenced by it or its legacy. Like there's a guy who's only read House of Leaves reading his second book. I'm getting a lot of House of Leaves vibes from this. There's a bit of that, that I feel like there's elements in that book that feel kind of similar here as well, like Minecraft as well, with nether portals, pigmen, weird things happening under the world, all that kind of stuff. Llama, snails are watered. You're now going to sleep because you're super tired. Well, good night. Thank you for being here. Sleep well. Yeah, I don't know. If you have other recommendations and suggestions, frankly, feel free to stick them in chat. Probably sounds like a pretty good reading and playing list, if so. But yeah, it's kind of fascinating to me. Like, it's pretty cool and certainly feels like something other things have taken inspiration from, right? Like, and that's the thing. I don't know how well known this book is today. Could potentially be very well known. I'm not sure. Like how familiar directly with it people writing more of this kind of material today are. But I feel like even if not directly, then there's got to be some kind of legacy through line. Like people in the past have read this and written ongoing further weird fiction that deals with these similar themes and atmospheres. And then that has gone on to sort of got more widespread and popularized and influenced the things that we do read today. I don't know. I am not any kind of literary historian or academic. So yeah, but I'm really enjoying this. I genuinely feel like there's like perhaps, I don't know, a couple of different ways in which I've like maybe if it were written or retold today it would be done a little bit differently, but it feels like it holds up to me, like in terms of just the material and like the ideas being expressed. I'm like, this is good stuff. It's known enough to have a Wikipedia page and there's a Terry Pratchett quote about it. Sick. Okay. You mean we didn't discover this book for the first time by me googling books by this author and then taking stuff from the internet and buying it and reading it on stream? Damn it. I really thought we'd unearthed a gem here. Oh well. Fire sufficiently fired. Congratulations. I hope it is a warm one. Yeah, like I don't know. It's good. I'm enjoying it a lot. But that said, I think we may actually be on the chapter with the potential for sad things. As we were discussing at the start of the stream, which, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much warning people want. I don't particularly want to like stop reading and say, hey, y'all, this is the sad part now. But I think just, yeah, be advised this chapter might make you sad if you're someone who is prone to feeling sad about things. But I guess we won't find out until we get there. So, if everyone is ready and comfy and cosy and has returned from a break, as I believe I have done, let us continue. This is Chapter 15. A plus vagueness? Great. It's probably the least helpful kind of vagueness in that it tells everyone that doesn't want spoilers, that doesn't really care about spoilers, exactly what's happening, and everyone that wants the specifics is going, no, more please. That's me, catering to none of the people all of the time. Right. Throat cleared. Water sipped. Oh yeah, and it wasn't Joey interrupting in the last half, it was burps that I was having to mute for, and so I'm just going to get myself ready for more of that, because it doesn't matter what time I eat and how much time I leave. That's what happens when I start reading, so great. Right. I'm going to keep trying and we're going to get there. Chapter 15. The Noise in the Night. And now I come to the strangest of all the strange happenings that have befallen me in this house of mysteries. It occurred quite lately, within the month, and I have little doubt but that what I saw was in reality the end of all things. However, to my story. I do not know how it is, but, up to the present, I have never been able to write these things down directly they happened. It is as though I have to wait a time, recovering my just balance, and digesting, as it were, the things I have heard or seen. No doubt this is as it should be, for by waiting I see the incidents more truly, and write of them in a calmer and more judicial frame of mind. This, by the way. It is now the end of November. My story relates to what happened in the first week of the month. It was about 11 o'clock. Pepper and I kept one another company in the study, that great old room of mine where I read and work. I was reading, curiously enough, the Bible. I have begun in these later days to take a growing interest in that great and ancient book. Suddenly, a distinct tremor shook the house, and there came a faint and distant whirring buzz that grew rapidly into a far, muffled screaming. It reminded me, in a queer, gigantic way, of the noise that a clock makes when the catch is released and it is allowed to run down. The sound appeared to come from some remote height. Somewhere up in the night. There was no repetition of the shock. I looked across at Pepper. He was sleeping peacefully. Gradually, the whirring noise decreased, and there came a long silence. All at once, a glow lit up the end window which protrudes far out from the side of the house, so that, from it, one may look both east and west. I felt puzzled, and, after a moment's hesitation, walked across the room and pulled aside the blind. As I did so, I saw the sun rise from behind the horizon. It rose with a steady, perceptible movement. I could see it travel upward. In a minute, it seemed, it had reached the tops of the trees, through which I had watched it. Up, up, it was broad daylight now. Behind me, I was conscious of a sharp, mosquito-like buzzing. I glanced round, and knew that it came from the clock. Even as I looked, it marked off an hour. The minute hand was moving round the dial faster than an ordinary second hand. The hour hand moved quickly from space to space. I had a numb sense of astonishment. A moment later, so it seemed, the two candles went out almost together. I turned swiftly back to the window, for I had seen the shadow of the window frames travelling along the floor toward me, as though a great lamp had been carried up past the window. I saw, now, that the sun had risen high into the heavens, and was still visibly moving. It passed above the house with an extraordinary sailing kind of motion. As the window came into shadow, I saw another extraordinary thing. The fine weather clouds were not passing easily across the sky. They were scampering, as though 100-mile-an-hour wind blew. As they passed, they changed their shapes 1,000 times a minute, as though writhing with a strange life, and so were gone. And presently others came and whisked away likewise. To the west I saw the sun drop with an incredible, smooth, swift motion. Eastward the shadows of every seen thing crept toward the coming greyness, and the movement of the shadows was visible to me, a stealthy, writhing creep of the shadows of the wind-stirred trees. It was a strange light. Quickly the room began to darken. The sun slid down to the horizon and seemed, as it were, to disappear from my sight almost with a jerk. Through the greyness of the swift evening I saw the silver crescent of the moon falling out of the southern sky toward the west. The evening seemed to merge into an almost instant night. Above me the many constellations passed in a strange, noiseless circling. Westward. The moon fell through that last 1,000 fathoms of the gulf night, of the night gulf, and there was only the starlight. About this time the buzzing in the corner ceased, telling me that the clock had run down. A few minutes passed, and I saw the eastward sky lighten. A grey, sullen morning spread through all the darkness and hid the march of the stars. Overhead there moved, with a heavy, everlasting rolling, a vast, seamless sky of grey clouds. A cloud sky that would have seemed motionless through all the length of an ordinary earth day. The sun was hidden from me, but from moment to moment the world would brighten and darken beneath waves of subtle light and shadow. The light shifted ever westward, and the night fell upon the earth. A vast rain seemed to come with it, and a wind of most extraordinary loudness, as though the howling of a night-long gale were packed into the space of no more than a minute. This noise passed almost immediately, and the clouds broke, so that once more I could see the sky. The stars were flying westward with astounding speed. It came to me now, for the first time, that, though the noise of the wind had passed, yet a constant blurred sound was in my ears. Now that I noticed it, I was aware that it had been with me all the time. It was the world noise. And then, even as I grasped at so much comprehension, there came the eastward light. No more than a few heartbeats, and the sun rose swiftly. Through the trees I saw it, and then it was up above the trees. Up it soared, and all the world was light. It passed with a swift, steady swing to its highest altitude, and fell thence westward. I saw the day roll visibly over my head. A few light clouds flitted northward and vanished. The sun went down with one swift, clear plunge, and there was, about me, for a few seconds, the darker, growing grey of the gloaming. Southward and westward, the moon was sinking rapidly. The night had come already. A minute, it seemed, and the moon fell those remaining fathoms of dark sky. Another minute or so, and the eastward sky glowed with the coming dawn. The sun leapt upon me with a frightening abruptness, and soared ever more swiftly toward the zenith. Then, suddenly, a fresh thing came to my sight, a black thundercloud rushing up out of the south, and seemed to leap all the arc of the sky in a single instant. As it came, I saw that its advancing edge flapped like a monstrous black cloth in the heaven, twirling and undulating rapidly with a horrid suggestiveness. In an instant, all the air was full of rain, and 100 lightning flashes seemed to flood downward, as it were, in one great shower. In the same second of time, the world noise was drowned in the roar of the wind, and then my ears ached under the stunning impact of the thunder. And, in the midst of this storm, the night came, and then, within the space of another minute, the storm had passed, and there was only the constant blur of the world noise on my hearing. Overhead, the stars were sliding quickly westward, and something, mayhaps the particular speed to which they had attained, brought home to me for the first time a keen realization of the knowledge that it was the world that revolved. I seemed to see suddenly the world, a vast dark mass revolving visibly against the stars. The dawn and the sun seemed to come together, so greatly had the speed of the world revolution increased. The sun drove up in one long, steady curve, past its highest point, and swept down into the western sky, and disappeared. I was scarcely conscious of evening, so brief was it. Then I was watching the flying constellations and the westward hastening moon, but in a space of seconds, so it seemed, it was sliding swiftly downward through the night blue, and then was gone. And almost directly came the morning. And now there seemed to come a strange acceleration. The sun made one clean, clear sweep through the sky and disappeared behind the westward horizon, and the night came and went with a like haste. As the succeeding day opened and closed upon the world, I was aware of a sweat of snow suddenly upon the earth. The night came, and almost immediately the day. In the brief leap of the sun, I saw that the snow had vanished, and then, once more, it was night. Thus matters were, and, even after the many incredible things that I have seen, I experienced all the time a most profound awe. To see the sun rise and set within a space of time to be measured by seconds, to watch, after a little, the moon leap, a pale and ever-growing orb, up into the night sky and glide with a strange swiftness through the vast arc of blue, and presently to see the sun follow, springing out of the eastern sky as though in chase, and then again the night, with the swift and ghostly passing of starry constellations, was all too much to view believingly. Yet, so it was. The day slipping from dawn to dusk, and the night sliding swiftly into day, ever rapidly and more rapidly. The last 3 passages of the sun had shown me a snow-covered earth, which, at night, had seemed, for a few seconds, incredibly weird under the fast shifting light of the soaring and falling moon. Now, however, for a little space, the sky was hidden by a sea of swaying, leaden-white clouds, which lightened and blackened alternately with the passage of day and night. The clouds rippled and vanished, and there was once more before me the vision of the swiftly leaping sun, and nights that came and went like shadows. Faster and faster spun the world, and now each day and night was completed within the space of but a few seconds, and still the speed increased. It was a little later that I noticed that the sun had begun to have the suspicion of a trail of fire behind it. This was due, evidently, to the speed at which it apparently traversed the heavens, and, as the days sped, each one quicker than the last, the sun began to assume the appearance of a vast flaming comet, flaring across the sky at short, periodic intervals. At night, the moon presented, with much greater truth, a comet-like aspect, a pale and singularly clear, fast-travelling shape of fire, trailing streaks of cold flame. The stars showed now, merely as fine hairs of fire against the dark. Once I turned from the window and glanced at Pepper. In the flash of a day, I saw that he slept quietly, and I moved once more to my watching. The sun was now bursting up from the eastern horizon like a stupendous rocket, seeming to occupy no more than a second or two in hurling from east to west. I could no longer perceive the passage of clouds across the sky, which seemed to have darkened somewhat. The brief nights appeared to have lost the proper darkness of night, so that the hair-like fire of the flying stars showed but dimly. As the speed increased, the sun began to sway very slowly in the sky, from south to north, and then slowly again, from north to south. So, amid a strange confusion of mind, the hours passed. All this while had Pepper slept. Presently, feeling lonely and distraught, I called to him softly, but he took no notice. Again I called, raising my voice slightly. Still he moved not. I walked over to where he lay, and touched him with my foot to rouse him. At the action, gentle though it was, he fell to pieces. That is what happened. He literally and actually crumbled into a mouldering heap of bones and dust. For the space of perhaps a minute, I stared down at the shapeless heap that had once been Pepper. I stood, feeling stunned. What can have happened? I asked myself, not at once grasping the grim significance of that little hill of ash. Then, as I stirred the heap with my foot, it occurred to me that this could only happen in a great space of time. Years and years. Outside, the weaving, fluttering light held the world. Inside, I stood, trying to understand what it meant, what that little pile of dust and dry bones on the carpet meant. But I could not think coherently. I glanced away round the room, and now for the first time noticed how dusty the old place looked. Dust and dirt everywhere, piled in little heaps in the corners and spread about upon the furniture. The very carpet itself was invisible beneath a coating of the same all-pervading material. As I walked, little clouds of the stuff rose up from under my footsteps and assailed my nostrils with a dry, bitter odour that made me wheeze huskily. Suddenly, as my glance fell again upon Pepper's remains, I stood still and gave voice to my confusion, questioning aloud whether the years were indeed passing, whether this, which I had taken to be a form of vision, was in truth a reality. I paused. A new thought had struck me. Quickly, but with steps which, for the first time I noticed, tottered, I went across the room to a great pier glass and looked in. It was too covered with grime to give back any reflection, and with trembling hands I began to rub off the dirt. Presently I could see myself. The thought that had come to me was confirmed. Instead of the great, hale man who scarcely looked 50, I was looking at a bent, decrepit man whose shoulders stooped and whose face was wrinkled with the years of a century. The hair, which a few short hours ago had been nearly coal-black, was now silvery white. Only the blue eyes were bright. Gradually I traced, in that ancient man, a faint resemblance to myself of other days. I turned away and tottered to the window. I knew now that I was old, and the knowledge seemed to confirm my trembling walk. For a little space I stared moodily out into the blurred vista of changeful landscape. Even in that short time, a year passed, and with a petulant gesture I left the window. As I did so, I noticed that my hand shook with the palsy of old age, and a short sob choked its way through my lips. For a little while I paced, tremulously, between the window and the table, my gaze wandering hither and thither uneasily. How dilapidated the room was. Everywhere lay the thick dust, thick, sleepy and black. The fender was a shape of rust. The chains that held the brass clock weights had rusted through long ago, and now the weights lay on the floor beneath, themselves 2 cones of verdigris. As I glanced about, it seemed to me that I could see the very furniture of the room rotting and decaying before my eyes. Nor was this fancy on my part, for all at once the bookshelf along the side wall collapsed with a cracking and rending of rotten wood, precipitating its contents upon the floor and filling the room with a smother of dusty atoms. How tired I felt. As I walked, it seemed that I could hear my dry joints creak and crack at every step. I wondered about my sister. Was she dead, as well as Pepper? All had happened so quickly, and suddenly this must be, indeed, the beginning of the end of all things. It occurred to me to go to look for her, but I felt too weary. And then, she had been so queer about these happenings of late. Of late. I repeated the words and laughed, feebly, mirthlessly, as the realization was borne in upon me that I spoke of a time half a century gone. Half a century? It might have been twice as long. I moved slowly to the window and looked out once more across the world. I can best describe the passage of day and night at this period as a sort of gigantic, ponderous flicker. Moment by moment the acceleration of time continued, so that at nights now I saw the moon only as a swaying trail of palish fire that varied from a mere line of light to a nebulous path and then dwindled again, disappearing periodically. The flicker of the days and nights quickened. The days had grown perceptibly darker, and a queer quality of dusk lay, as it were, in the atmosphere. The nights were so much lighter that the stars were scarcely to be seen, saving here and there an occasional hair-like line of fire that seemed to sway a little with the moon. Quicker and ever quicker ran the flicker of day and night, and suddenly it seemed I was aware that the flicker had died out, and, instead, there reigned a comparatively steady light, which was shed down upon all the world, from an eternal river of flame that swung up and down, north and south, in stupendous mighty swings. The sky was now grown very much darker, and there was in the blue of it a heavy gloom, as though a vast blackness peered through it upon the earth. Yet there was in it also a strange and awful clearness and emptiness. Periodically I had glimpses of a ghostly track of fire that swayed thin and darkly toward the sun-stream, vanished and reappeared. It was the scarcely visible moon-stream. Looking out at the landscape, I was conscious again of a blurring sort of flitter that came either from the light of the ponderous swinging sunstream or was the result of the incredibly rapid changes of the earth's surface. And every few moments, so it seemed, the snow would lie suddenly upon the world and vanish as abruptly, as though an invisible giant flitted a white sheet off and on the earth. Time fled, and the weariness that was mine grew insupportable. I turned from the window and walked once across the room, the heavy dust deadening the sound of my footsteps. Each step that I took seemed a greater effort than the one before. An intolerable ache knew me in every joint and limb as I trod my way with a weary uncertainty. By the opposite wall, I came to a weak pause and wondered, dimly, what was my intent. I looked to my left and saw my old chair. The thought of sitting in it brought a faint sense of comfort to my bewildered wretchedness. Yet because I was so weary and old and tired, I would scarcely brace my mind to do anything but stand and wish myself past those few yards. I rocked as I stood. The floor even seemed a place for rest, but the dust lay so thick and sleepy and black. I turned with a great effort of will and made toward my chair. I reached it with a groan of thankfulness. I sat down. Everything about me appeared to be growing dim. It was all so strange and unthought of. Last night I was a comparatively strong though elderly man, and now, only a few hours later, I looked at the little dust heap that had once been Pepper. Hours, and I laughed, a feeble, bitter laugh, a shrill, cackling laugh that shocked my dimming senses. For a while I must have dozed. Then I opened my eyes with a start. Somewhere across the room there had been a muffled noise of something falling. I looked and saw vaguely a cloud of dust hovering above a pile of debris. Nearer the door, something else tumbled with a crash. It was one of the cupboards, but I was tired and took little notice. I closed my eyes and sat there in a state of drowsy semi-unconsciousness. Once or twice, as though coming through thick mists, I heard noises faintly. Then I must have slept. Chapter 16. The Awakening. I awoke with a start. For a moment I wondered where I was. Then memory came to me. The room was still lit with that strange light, half sun, half moonlight. I felt refreshed, and the tired, weary ache had left me. I went slowly across to the window and looked out. Overhead, the river of flame drove up and down, north and south, in a dancing semicircle of fire. As a mighty sleigh in the loom of time it seemed, for a sudden fancy of mine, to be beating home the picks of the years. For so vastly had the passage of time been accelerated that there was no longer any sense of the sun passing from east to west. The only apparent movement was the north and south beat of the sun stream that had become so swift now as to be better described as a quiver. As I peered out, there came to me a sudden, inconsequent memory of that last journey among the outer worlds. I remembered the sudden vision that had come to me as I neared the solar system of the fast, whirling planets about the sun, as though the governing quality of time had been held in abeyance, and the machine of a universe allowed to run down an eternity in a few moments or hours. The memory passed, along with a but partially comprehended suggestion that I had been permitted a glimpse into further time spaces. I stared out again, seemingly at the quake of the sunstream. The speed seemed to increase even as I looked. Several lifetimes came and went as I watched. Suddenly, it struck me with a sort of grotesque seriousness that I was still alive. I thought of Pepper, and wondered how it was that I had not followed his fate. He had reached the time of his dying, and had passed, probably, through sheer length of years. And here was I, alive, hundreds of thousands of centuries after my rightful period of years. For a time I mused absently. Yesterday, I stopped suddenly. Yesterday. There was no yesterday. The yesterday of which I spoke had been swallowed up in the abyss of years, ages gone. I grew dazed with much thinking. Presently I turned from the window and glanced round the room. It seemed different, strangely, utterly different. Then I knew what it was that made it appear so strange. It was bare. There was not a piece of furniture in the room, not even a solitary fitting of any sort. Gradually my amazement went as I remembered that this was but the inevitable end of that process of decay excuse me, which I had witnessed commencing before my sleep. Thousands of years, millions of years. Over the floor was spread a deep layer of dust that reached halfway up to the window seat. It had grown immeasurably whilst I slept, and represented the dust of untold ages. Undoubtedly, atoms of the old, decayed furniture helped to swell its bulk, and somewhere among it all mouldered the long-ago dead Pepper. All at once it occurred to me that I had no recollection of wading knee-deep through all that dust after I woke. True, an incredible age of years had passed since I approached the window, but that was evidently as nothing compared with the countless spaces of time that, I conceived, had vanished whilst I was sleeping. I remembered now that I had fallen asleep sitting in my old chair. Had it gone? I glanced toward where it had stood. Of course there was no chair to be seen. I could not satisfy myself whether it had disappeared after my waking or before. If it had mouldered under me, surely I should have been waked by the collapse. Then I remembered that the thick dust which covered the floor would have been sufficient to soften my fall, so that it was quite possible I had slept upon the dust for 1,000,000 years or more. As these thoughts wandered through my brain, I glanced again, casually, to where the chair had stood. Then, for the first time, I noticed that there were no marks in the dust of my footprints between it and the window. But then ages of years had passed since I had awaked. Tens of thousands of years. My look rested thoughtfully again upon the place where once had stood my chair. Suddenly I passed from abstraction to intentness, for there, in its standing place, I made out a long undulation rounded off with the heavy dust. Yet it was not so much hidden but that I could tell what had caused it. I knew, and shivered at the knowledge, that it was a human body, ages dead, lying there beneath the place where I had slept. It was lying on its right side, its back turned toward me. I could make out and trace each curve and outline, softened and moulded as it were in the black dust. In a vague sort of way I tried to account for its presence there. Slowly I began to grow bewildered, as the thought came to me that it lay just about where I must have fallen when the chair collapsed. Gradually an idea began to form itself within my brain, a thought that shook my spirit. It seemed hideous and insupportable, yet it grew upon me steadily until it became a conviction. The body under that coating, that shroud of dust, was neither more nor less than my own dead shell. I did not attempt to prove it. I knew it now and wondered I had not known it all along. I was a bodiless thing. A while I stood, trying to adjust my thoughts to this new problem. In time, how many thousands of years I know not, I attained to some degree of quietude sufficient to enable me to pay attention to what was transpiring around me. Now I saw that the elongated mound had sunk, collapsed level with the rest of the spreading dust, and fresh atoms, impalpable, had settled above the mixture of grave powder, which the eons had ground. A long while I stood turned from the window. Gradually I grew more collected, while the world slipped across the centuries into the future. Presently I began a survey of the room. Now I saw that time was beginning its destructive work even on this strange old building. That it had stood through all the years was, it seemed to me, proof that it was something different from any other house. I do not think, somehow, that I had thought of its decaying, though why I could not have said. It was not until I had meditated upon the matter for some considerable time that I fully realized that the extraordinary space of time through which it had stood was sufficient to have utterly pulverized the very stones of which it was built, had they been taken from any earthly quarry. Yet, yes, it was undoubtedly mouldering now. All the plaster had gone from the walls, even as the woodwork of the room had gone many ages before. While I stood in contemplation, a piece of glass from one of the small diamond-shaped panes dropped with a dull tap amid the dust upon the sill behind me, and crumbled into a little heap of powder. As I turned from contemplating it, I saw light between a couple of the stones that formed the outer wall. Evidently, the mortar was falling away. After a while, I turned once more to the window and peered out. I discovered, now, that the speed of time had become enormous. The lateral quiver of the sunstream had grown so swift as to cause the dancing semicircle of flame to merge into and disappear in a sheet of fire that covered half the southern sky from east to west. From the sky I glanced down to the gardens. They were just a blur of a palish, dirty green. I had a feeling that they stood higher than in the old days, a feeling that they were nearer my window, as though they had risen bodily. Yet they were still a long way below me, for the rock over the mouth of the pit on which this house stands arches up to a great height. It was later that I noticed a change in the constant colour of the gardens. The pale, dirty green was growing ever paler and paler toward white. At last, after a great space, they became greyish-white, and stayed thus for a very long time. Finally, however, the greyness began to fade, even as had the green, into a dead white. And this remained, constant and unchanged, and by this I knew that, at last, snow lay upon all the northern world. And so, by millions of years, time winged onward through eternity to the end of which, in the old earth days, I had thought remotely and in hazily speculative fashion. And now it was approaching, in a manner of which none had ever dreamed. I recollect that, about this time, I began to have a lively, though morbid curiosity as to what would happen when the end came, but I seemed strangely without imaginings. All this while the steady process of decay was continuing. The few remaining pieces of glass had long ago vanished, and, every now and then, a soft thud and a little cloud of rising dust would tell of some fragment of fallen mortar or stone. I looked up again to the fiery sheet that quaked in the heavens above me and far down into the southern sky. As I looked, the impression was borne in upon me that it had lost some of its first brilliancy, that it was duller, deeper hued. I glanced down once more to the blurred white of the worldscape. Sometimes my look returned to the burning sheet of dulling flame that was and yet hid the sun. At times I glanced behind me into the growing dusk of the great silent room with its aeon carpet of sleeping dust. So I watched through the fleeting ages, lost in soul-wearying thoughts and wanderings, and possessed with a new weariness. Chapter 17. The Slowing Rotation. It might have been a million years later that I perceived, beyond possibility of doubt, that the fiery sheet that lit the world was indeed darkening. Another vast space went by, and the whole enormous flame had sunk to a deep copper colour. Gradually it darkened from copper to copper red, and from this at times to a deep, heavy purplish tint, with, in it, a strange loom of blood. Although the light was decreasing, I could perceive no diminishment in the apparent speed of the sun. It still spread itself in that dazzling veil of speed. The world, so much of it as I could see, had assumed a dreadful shade of gloom, as though, in very deed, the last days of the worlds approached. The sun was dying. Of that there could be little doubt, and still the earth whirled onward, through space and all the aeons. At this time, I remember, an extraordinary sense of bewilderment took me. I found myself, later, wandering mentally, amid an odd chaos of fragmentary modern theories and the old biblical story of the world's ending. Then, for the first time, there flashed across me the memory that the sun, with its system of planets, was and had been travelling through space at an incredible speed. Abruptly the questions rose. Where? For a very great time I pondered this matter, but finally, with a certain sense of the futility of my puzzlings, I let my thoughts wander to other things. I grew to wondering how much longer the house would stand. Also, I queried to myself whether I should be doomed to stay bodiless upon the earth through the dark time that I knew was coming. From these thoughts I fell again to speculation upon the possible direction of the sun's journey through space, and so another great while passed. Gradually, as time fled, I began to feel the chill of a great winter. Then I remembered that, with the sun dying, the cold must be necessarily extraordinarily intense. Slowly, as the aeons slipped into eternity, the earth sank into a heavier and redder gloom. The dull flame of the firmament took on a deeper tint, very sombre and turbid. Then, at last, it was borne upon me that there was a change. The fiery, gloomy curtain of flame that hung quaking overhead and down away into the southern sky began to thin and contract. And in it, as one sees the fast vibrations of a jarred harp string, I saw once more the sun stream quivering giddily north and south. Slowly the likeness to a sheet of fire disappeared, and I saw, plainly, the slowing beat of the sunstream. Yet, even then, the speed of its swing was inconceivably swift, and all the time the brightness of the fiery arc grew ever duller. Underneath, the world loomed dimly, an indistinct, ghostly region. Overhead, the river of flame swayed slower and even slower, until at last it swung to the north and south in great ponderous beats that lasted through seconds. A long space went by, and now each sway of the great belt lasted nigh a minute, so that, after a great while, I ceased to distinguish it as a visible movement, and the streaming fire ran in a steady river of dull flame across the deadly-looking sky. An indefinite period passed, and it seemed that the arc of fire became less sharply defined. It appeared to me to grow more attenuated, and I thought blackish streaks showed occasionally. Presently, as I watched, the smooth onward flow ceased, and I was able to perceive that there came a momentary but regular darkening of the world. This grew until once more night descended, in short but periodic intervals, upon the wearying earth. Longer and longer came the nights, and the days equalled them, so that, at last, the day and the night grew to the duration of seconds in length, and the sun showed once more like an almost invisible coppery red-coloured ball, within the glowing mistiness of its flight. Corresponding to the dark lines, showing at times in its trail, there were now distinctly to be seen on the half-visible sun itself, great dark belts. Year after year flashed into the past, and the days and nights spread into minutes. The sun had ceased to have the appearance of a tail, and now rose and set, a tremendous globe of a glowing copper-bronze hue, in parts ringed with blood-red bands, in others with the dusky ones that I have already mentioned. These circles, both red and black, were of varying thicknesses. For a time I was at a loss to account for their presence. Then it occurred to me that it was scarcely likely that the sun would cool evenly all over, and that these markings were due, probably, to differences in temperature of the various areas, the red representing those parts where the heat was still fervent, and the black those portions which were already comparatively cool. It struck me as a peculiar thing that the sun should cool in evenly defined rings, until I remembered that, possibly, they were but isolated patches to which the enormous rotatory speed of the sun had imparted a belt-like appearance. The sun itself was very much greater than the sun I had known in the old world days, and from this I argued that it was considerably nearer. At nights the moon still showed, but small and remote, and the light she reflected was so dull and weak that she seemed little more than a small dim ghost of the olden moon that I had known. Gradually the days and nights lengthened out until they equalled a space somewhat less than one of the old earth hours, the sun rising and setting like a great ruddy bronze disk, crossed with ink-black bars. About this time I found myself able once more to see the gardens with clearness, for the world had now grown very still and changeless. Yet I am not correct in saying gardens, for there were no gardens, nothing that I knew or recognized. In place thereof I looked out upon a vast plain stretching away into distance. A little to my left there was a low range of hills. Everywhere there was a uniform white coverings of snow, in places rising into hummocks and ridges. It was only now that I recognized how really great had been the snowfall. In places it was vastly deep, as was witnessed by a great up-leaping wave-shaped hill away to my right, though it is not impossible that this was due in part to some rise in the surface of the ground. Strangely enough, the range of low hills to my left, already mentioned, was not entirely covered with universal snow. Instead I could see their bare, dark sides showing in several places, and everywhere and always there reigned an incredible death silence and desolation, the immutable, awful quiet of a dying world. All this time the days and nights were lengthening perceptibly. Already each day occupied maybe some 2 hours from dawn to dusk. At night I had been surprised to find that there were very few stars overhead, and these small, though of an extraordinary brightness, which I attributed to the peculiar but clear blackness of the night-time. Away to the north I could discern a nebulous sort of mistiness, not unlike in appearance a small portion of the Milky Way. It might have been an extremely remote star cluster, or, the thought came to me suddenly, perhaps it was the sidereal universe that I had known, and now left far behind forever. A small, dimly glowing mist of stars, far in the depths of space. Still the days and nights lengthened slowly. Each time the sun rose duller than it had set, and the dark belts increased in breadth. About this time there happened a fresh thing. The sun, earth, and sky were suddenly darkened and apparently blotted out for a brief space. I had a certain awareness, I could learn little by sight, that the earth was enduring a very great fall of snow. Then, in an instant, the veil that had obscured everything vanished, and I looked out once more. A marvellous sight met my gaze. The hollow in which this house, with its gardens, stands, was brimmed with snow. It lipped over the sill of my window. Everywhere it lay, a great level stretch of white which caught and reflected gloomily the sombre coppery glows of the dying sun. The world had become a shadowless plain from horizon to horizon. I glanced up at the sun. It shone with an extraordinary dull clearness. I saw it now as one who until then had seen it only through a partially obscuring medium. All about it the sky had become black, with a clear, deep blackness, frightful in its nearness, and its unmeasured deep, and its utter unfriendliness. For a great time I looked into it, newly and shaken and fearful. It was so near. Had I been a child, I might have expressed some of my sensation and distress by saying that the sky had lost its roof. Later, I turned and peered about me into the room. Everywhere it was covered with a thin shroud of the all-pervading white. I could see it but dimly by reason of the sombre light that now lit the world. It appeared to cling to the ruined walls, and the thick, soft dust of the years that covered the floor knee-deep was nowhere visible. The snow must have blown in through the open framework of the windows. Yet in no place had it drifted, but lay everywhere about the great old room, smooth and level. Moreover, there had been no wind these many thousand years, but there was the snow, as I have told. And all the earth was silent. There was a cold such as no living man can ever have known. The earth was now illuminated by day with a most doleful light beyond my power to describe. It seemed as though I looked at the great plain through the medium of a bronze-tinted sea. It was evident that the earth's rotatory movement was departing steadily. The end came all at once. The night had been the longest yet, and when the dying sun showed at last above the world's edge, I had grown so wearied of the dark that I greeted it as a friend. It rose steadily until about 20 degrees above the horizon. Then it stopped suddenly and, after a strange retrograde movement, hung motionless, a great shield in the sky. Only the circular rim of the sun showed bright. Only this, and one thin streak of light near the equator. Gradually, even this thread of light died out, and now all that was left of our great and glorious sun was a vast dead disk, rimmed with a thin circle of red light. Which brings us to the end of the chapter, and where I shall finish reading for tonight. That was actually meant to be bronze red light, but it's the last words of the chapter. I didn't want to go back and correct myself for that, so you get red light instead. So, how's everyone doing? Did everyone like William Hope Hodgson's take on the time machine? It got very cosmic, right? You know, my guy sent us on a trip, distracting ourselves from the sad bit. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, Did you skip a bit of text? No, we didn't. I saw that comment when I started reading after the break, and yeah, there wasn't anything skipped, but it sure felt like it, because... Wait, the fragments. What? Because where I left it, the Sea of Sleep, which is chapter 14, and then... Is there actually a bit that I missed? Hang on. Or is there like something that's not in this book that's in the... Do I need to... Wait. The Sea of Sleep is a very nice phrase. Yeah. I love that sort of... The description that brings up. Oh... That's not in my book. What is that? Yeah, you're right, Parola. What? The legible portions of the mutant... Like, who... That... Huh. See, I now want to quickly skim that and see whether I can see some reason why it would be left out. No, because, okay, quickly skimming that feels like a summary of the bit that I just read. Kind of talking about like spinning across vast depths of space at great speed or something. I don't know. That's really weird. Yeah, because no, in my book it literally goes from wherever it was. When I reached out my hands to her, she put me from her with tenderly stern hands, and I was abashed. And then it just sort of cuts, and then we go on to chapter 15, The Noise in the Night. And... yeah. That's really weird. Why would you leave that out? It's not even in as like a footnote or anything. Or like a, hey, here's an optional bit that you may not care about reading. They just wholly left it out of the book. Well, that sucks. Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, I can understand the confusion now. Hey, Joey, I know it's nonsense. But yeah, that brings us to the end of that. Well, I guess then yeah, please feel free to go back and read the fragments and fit that in at the correct point. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, weird. Okay. But yeah, I mean, like in terms of the text that we got, yeah, I really like that bit. I think it is very reminiscent of the time machine, and there's like it was only 100 years ago, but oh, hang on, Joey wants to go out. Like it was only 100 years ago, and even by that point we had a decent, I think, fairly decent understanding, like scientific understanding of the cosmos, of space, of like our solar system and how things work and fit together. Obviously there's a lot of things that we've learned since then, but for some reason when reading this bit there's a part of my brain that still goes, oh good, they understood back then that, you know, Earth wasn't the centre of the solar system and everything in the universe and everything didn't revolve around us, and actually the sun would go up, like the very basic thing that we've known about for like probably a few thousand years by now, going by some cultures. I don't know. That, like, you know, Earth spins and moves in an orbit around the sun, which moves itself slowly through the galaxy and around the universe and all that kind of stuff. And yet, for some reason, when like encountering that in a story written 100 years ago, there's still a voice at the back of my brain goes, "Huh, nice one. You knew about that." I'm like, well, yeah, of course, because I don't know. You're assuming he'll go back so he can write all this down? I believe so. Yeah, but again, like that's what confused me, because the bit that opens this whole account seems to be written from the end of things, but also apparently isn't. But there is still a journal that is encountered by people. So, yeah. Presumably he survives enough to write this and pass it on to people in his present day. Technically, you think the sun is supposed to get huge and consume the earth before it goes out. That yes, there is that. That in this, the sun just kind of grows old and gets cold. Mood, as opposed to getting big and engulfing the solar system, but you know, there's details. But yeah, I think what we got was just an account of a guy in his 40s encountering depression and ADHD. Basically, I was in a room. The room just became increasingly dusty. Things fell apart. I knew that I should be like cleaning and tidying. But to be honest, I couldn't even bring myself to walk across the room to sit in a chair that I wanted to sit in. And time just kept going by really fast. Like, who among us can't relate to that? But yeah. So just, you know, look out for the sun racing through the sky into a ribbon. Entirely too relatable, not gonna lie. Exactly, right? Welcome, neurodivergence. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the stream. And what, Sam? What's next? The end of the stream and the end of the stream? Oh, Dave is still going with Skull and Bones? Ooh. Should we ride over to Dave, who's probably... Or is he still going, or is he just finishing? This may make sound on stream. It looks like he's finishing. Okay, he's finishing. Then we shan't raid over to Dave. He's finishing up. Well then, Billiam is on. Should we go and see Billiam? He might also... He doesn't look like he's finishing just yet. Also, when he does, he puts up a thing to say he's finishing so people can raid over to him and delay him for longer, and it's funny. So, let us raid over to Billiam. And Thunder, yes, hello. I just see you like sneaking in and out. I hope you're well. Hope you have had a good evening. And to everyone else as well. I hope that you are all of the well disposition and looking after yourselves and the people around you. Maybe go hug your pets. And yeah, we should be back, I imagine. Also, be gay and do crimes. Yes, exactly. It's endorsed. Yeah, in theory, we should be back on not tomorrow, Monday. Actually, I think Lucy and I are planning to do our next Chillitrity stream. Yes, indeed, there's the new emote provided handily by Lady Mephistopheles of. In that form, it's a little bit difficult to read the text, but you know, if you click on it, you can see that it's the eternal tomato soup. But yeah, we should be back on Monday for some Chillitrity and talking over the games. And then probably back on Wednesday after that with some more bits and pieces from Lucy, who's probably reading more Catherine Mansfield. But for now, I'm going to go. So thank you all for being here. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of whatever weekend you have. Go listen to Voyage some more. It's a good album. Hope you're all enjoying that. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one. Goodbye and good night.